The architecture of hell was not built of fire, but of absolute suffocating silence. Deep within the abyss of lament, a cage forged from the prayers of the desperate held Malachor. For eons, he had been a whisper of rot in the minds of men, a shadow in the corner of every bloody war. But he was bound, a king without a kingdom, tethered to the bedrock of damnation by the celestial chains of the higher spheres. Malachor was tired of whispers. He wanted a voice. He wanted a scream. The vessel, the lock to his cage, was not made of metal. It was made of blood. Specifically, the blood of an innocent born under a dying star, a soul so fractured by trauma that their spirit had a hollow space, a void where a demon could comfortably reside. That person was Mike, a disgraced former priest living in the neon-drenched sprawl of a city that had long ago traded its soul for profit. Mike lived in the gutters of his own guilt, haunted by the memory of the parish he couldn't save. He was the perfect key. The escape. Malachor reached out from the void, projecting his consciousness, not into the physical world, but into the dreams of the broken. Every night, Elias dreamt of a door, an iron gate etched with runes of suffering, standing in the middle of a desert of ash. "Open it," the voice hissed, a sound like grinding stone. "Open it, and I will mend your broken heart. Open it, and you will never feel pain again." Mike, desperate for relief from his own grief, found the physical manifestation of this door in the ruins of an ancient, forgotten cathedral beneath the city's subway system. As his hand touched the cold, blackened iron, the world groaned. The fabric of reality tore, and for the first time in an eternity, Malachor was not just a whisper, he was a presence. He flooded into Mike, not as a parasite, but as a storm, turning the man's eyes a searing, unnatural violet. The celestial intervention. The heavens did not watch this with indifference. High above the clouds, the high guard descended. They did not come as winged deities with halos, but as flashes of kinetic energy, absolute, terrifying manifestations of law and order. Michael, the archangel of the presence, led the charge. He was the sword of heaven, his presence alone causing the very atmosphere to crackle with ozone. Beside him stood Gabriel, whose voice carried the frequency of creation, and Raphael, the healer, who knew that to stop the infection, the limb, or in this case, the human, might have to be severed. The collision. The battle erupted in the heart of the city. Malachor, piloting Mike's body, turned the streets into a war zone. He didn't just want destruction, he wanted a feast. He shattered the minds of the civilians, turning their fears into physical manifestations, shadow monsters that clawed at the air. Michael struck first, his blade, a ripple of pure white light, cleaving through the smog. Malachor met the blow, the force of their collision shattering the windows of every skyscraper within a 3-mile radius. "You are a cancer, Malachor," Michael's voice boomed, a sound that forced the demons of the lower city to recoil in terror. "And you are a jailer, Michael," Malachor laughed, the sound bubbling up through Mike's throat, distorted and wretched. "I am not just rising, I am replacing you." Gabriel unleashed a resonant wave of sound that sent the shadow monsters dissolving into ash, but Malachor countered by forcing Mike to perform acts of profound human cruelty, knowing the angels were sworn to protect the sanctity of the human soul. They couldn't strike him down without killing Elias, the very thing they were sworn to protect. Raphael moved with blinding speed, attempting to reach into the void of Mike's chest to sever the tether between the man and the demon. But Malachor was cunning. He kept Mike in a state of constant, swirling agony, a psychic shield that made the boy's heart a fortress of thorns. The choice. The battle reached a stalemate atop the city's tallest spire. Michael held his sword at Malachor's throat, but the demon held Elias's heart in his grip. "Strike me, Archangel," Malachor goaded, his eyes glowing with the fires of the abyss. "Kill the vessel, and you prove that your love for humanity is a lie. Leave me, and I will drown this world in blood." The sky turned a bruised, deep purple. The angels, the bringers of order, were forced to confront the chaos they could not control. As the dawn began to bleed over the horizon, the true war for the soul of the earth had only just begun. The gate was open, the demon was loose, and the heavens had finally descended to reclaim a world that was rapidly learning that it had no one left to save it but itself. How would you like to see the dynamic between Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael evolve as they realize they have to make a choice between their holy mission and the life of the innocent man Mike? The wind whipped around the pinnacle of the skyscraper, carrying the stench of ozone and brimstone. Michael's blade hummed, a terrifyingly beautiful sound that threatened to atomize anything it touched. His golden armor glowed with a blinding celestial luminescence, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete roof. Malachor, wearing Elias's trembling, battered body, stood hunched at the edge of the parapet. His face was a mask of sweat and blood, his eyes flickering rapidly between the soft, fearful brown of the human and the searing, predatory violet of the demon. "Look at them, Michael," Malachor sneered, the voice a dissonant layering of a young man's plea and a beast's command. He gestured toward the city below, where fires were already beginning to bloom like dark flowers in the night. "They are sheep waiting for the slaughter. Why hesitate? You've destroyed cities for less in the history of your precious order." "I am not here to destroy," Michael replied, his voice a calm, resonant anchor against the chaos. "I am here to bind." Gabriel stepped forward, his expression grave. He held a scroll of translucent, light-woven parchment. "The pact is broken, Malachor. You have tainted the vessel beyond the natural law. You have no legal anchor here." "Legal?" Malachor laughed, a wet, rattling sound. He shoved his own hand into his chest, clutching at the invisible tether that connected his essence to Mike's soul. "I am the violation of law. If you want me out, you'll have to tear him apart to get to me." Raphael moved to the side, his hands radiating a soft, emerald light, the only warmth in the freezing high-altitude air. "Michael, his heart rate is failing. The demonic possession is liquefying his organs. If we don't act, the vessel dies regardless of whether we strike." Malachor sensed the hesitation. He saw the slight shift in Michael's posture. With a wicked grin, he forced Elias's body to kneel, pressing the cold barrel of a discarded police handgun against his own chin. "Then choose, Archangel. Do you watch the vessel perish, or do you stand down and let me walk?" Michael's sword dimmed slightly, the tip dipping just an inch. It was the crack in the armor Malachor needed. "Now!" Malachor shrieked, no longer playing the calm captor. He channeled the dark energy of the abyss through Elias's nervous system, turning the man into a conduit. A shockwave of pure necrotic force exploded from the skyscraper's rooftop, knocking Gabriel and Raphael backward. The stone beneath their feet shattered, sending debris raining down onto the streets below. Michael stood his ground, his wings erupting from his back, vast, shimmering expanses of iron-colored feathers to shield the others from the blast. "Mike!" Raphael shouted, ignoring the blast, his hands weaving a complex web of healing light. "Listen to the light within you. You are not his cage, you are the lock." Mike's head lolled back, his mouth opening in a silent, agonizing scream. The violet light in his eyes flared brighter, then pulsed, dimming, then flaring again. He was fighting, pushing back against the encroaching rot, his own memories of the church and his lost parishioners acting as a subconscious barrier against the demon's absolute control. Malachor snarled, his fingers digging into his own ribcage. "Shut him up, Raphael. Your songs don't work in the dark." Malachor lunged, not away from the angels, but directly at Michael. He moved with a speed that defied the laws of gravity, a blur of shadow and stolen muscle. Michael parried, the clash of his blade against the demonic energy producing a shockwave that silenced the city's sirens for a block in every direction. "You are a spirit of pride," Michael said, his eyes hardening into cold, unyielding judgment. You think you can outrun the inevitable, but the abyssal gates are closing, Malachor. You are already being pulled back. Then I'm taking this city down with me, Malachor roared, raising his hand to cast a ruinous spell of fire. But Mike's hand, of its own volition, clamped over his own wrist, stopping the movement. Mike gasped, his face streaming with tears. I won't let you, he wheezed, his own voice finally cutting through the demon's gravelly tone. You are nothing, Malachor hissed, his focus fractured. I am the gate, Mike whispered, staring directly at Michael, his eyes now a swirling, dangerous mix of brown and violet. And I'm locking it. Mike slammed his hand against his own heart. The celestial light from Raphael's hands caught the motion, turning the act of sacrifice into a binding ritual. The roof began to groan as gravity itself seemed to invert, pulling everything toward the center of the vessel. The air on the rooftop reached a volatile equilibrium, the heavy, metallic static of Michael's blade grinding against the oily, suffocating pressure of Malachor's essence. Mike's body hung suspended in the center of the convergence, his spine arched in agony, his hands still clamped over his own heart. The skin around his fingers began to glow with a sickly, bruised light as the barrier between the human and the infernal began to dissolve. Don't do it, boy, Malachor shrieked, his voice fracturing as the power was pulled inward toward Mike's core. If you snap that lock, you burn with me. There is no paradise waiting for you, just the silence of the void. I'm not looking for paradise, Mike wheezed, his voice rattling in a chest that felt like it was being crushed by invisible weights. His eyes snapped toward Michael, the archangel, who had stopped his advance, his blade now glowing with a blinding, white-hot intensity. Michael, Raphael shouted, his voice desperate. He's creating a singularity of soul matter. If he completes the binding, the feedback loop will incinerate his physical form along with the demon. He's committing spiritual suicide. Michael took a step forward, his metallic wings beating once, twice, creating a gale-force wind that cleared the smoke from the roof. He ignored Raphael. He saw the flicker of humanity in Mike, the terrifying, beautiful resolve of a man who had realized that being a vessel was a role he would no longer play. Mike, Michael's voice boomed, cutting through the screeching of the abyss. Release the anchor. Let us perform the extraction. You don't have to die to win. It's the only way to be sure, Mike spat, his lips peeling back as blood trickled from his nose. Malachor sensed the finality of the boy's intent. The demon erupted, not in violence, but in a desperate, frantic bid for survival. He flooded Mike's mind with visions of his failures, the faces of every parishioner he had failed to protect, the crushing weight of his own self-loathing. He tried to drown Mike's resolve in a tsunami of his own past trauma. Mike's knees buckled, but his hand didn't move. He dug his fingers into his own chest, the sound of tearing fabric and skin sickeningly audible over the roaring wind. Gabriel, Michael commanded, not taking his eyes off the boy. The chorus, now! Gabriel raised both hands, his fingers dancing through the air as if playing an invisible instrument. A melody, haunting and ancient, a frequency that predated the foundations of the earth, began to vibrate from the very atoms of the building. It wasn't a song, it was a command of absolute geometry. The sound hit the rooftop, and Malachor screamed, a sound that shattered the remaining glass in the skyline. The demon's essence began to be pulled out of Mike's pores like ribbons of black smoke, coiling around the archangel's glowing blade. I am the gate, Mike roared, his voice amplified by the celestial energy surrounding him. He didn't pull his hand away. He pushed it deeper, acting as the anchor for Gabriel's song. The gate is closed, Michael bellowed. With a swing that cleaved the very air, Michael brought his blade down, not on Mike, but through the swirling vortex of black smoke. The impact was silent, a sudden absolute vacuum that swallowed all sound, all light, all motion. The rooftop erupted in a blinding flash of white that turned the night sky into high noon. Then, just as quickly, the pressure vanished. Mike collapsed forward, his body hitting the concrete with a heavy, lifeless thud. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the rain beginning to fall, sizzling as it hit the still glowing embers of the ritual site. The rain intensified, turning the soot and blood on the rooftop into a dark, viscous slurry. Michael landed with a heavy metallic thud, his wings folding behind him like sheets of slate. He stood over Mike's motionless form, the heat still radiating from his armor in waves. Gabriel and Raphael materialized beside him, their expressions unreadable, their forms flickering like dying candle flames. The resonance of the song still lingered in the air, a high-pitched vibration that made the teeth ache. "Is it done?" Gabriel asked, his voice subdued, lacking its usual orchestral grandeur. He looked toward the spot where the black smoke had vanished, his eyes tracing the jagged rent in the fabric of reality that was already beginning to knit itself back together. Raphael didn't answer. He dropped to his knees, his hands hovering over Mike's chest. The fabric of the man's shirt was shredded, his skin scorched into a network of blackened, spiderweb-like veins, the physical toll of the ritual. "The demon is expelled," Raphael murmured, his fingers twitching as he sent pulses of restorative light into the man's cooling frame. "But the vessel is empty, Michael." He didn't just lock the door. He hollowed himself out to do it. Michael gripped the hilt of his sword, his knuckles white. He looked down at Mike's face. The purple hue had faded, leaving only a deathly waxen pallor. There was no rise or fall of the chest, no flicker of consciousness. The man who had been a key, a prisoner, and finally a martyr, looked profoundly, terrifyingly ordinary in the downpour. "He chose this," Michael said, though his voice lacked its typical iron conviction. "He was a human," Raphael countered, his voice sharpening with rare divine indignation. "He was a man who lived in the gutters and carried the weight of his failures. He didn't choose this because he was a saint. He chose this because he was tired of being a victim." A sudden sharp intake of air shattered the silence. Mike's body bucked against the concrete, a violent spastic spasm that sent droplets of rain flying. His back arched, his eyes snapping open. They weren't brown anymore, and they weren't violet. They were a flat, opaque gray like the sky over the city. He gasped, a wet, choking sound, as if he were inhaling water instead of air. He clawed at his chest, his fingernails digging into his own sternum, his body rigid with a lingering phantom agony. "Mike?" Raphael reached out, but he recoiled as the air around the man shifted. It wasn't demonic. It wasn't celestial. It was something else. A heavy, localized distortion of reality that pulled the raindrops toward him, causing them to hover and drift in impossible orbits around his shivering frame. Mike turned his head, his neck popping with the sound of dry wood. He looked at Michael. He didn't look afraid. He looked like a man who had seen the clockwork of the universe and found it wanting. "You didn't save me," Mike rasped, his voice sounding like 1,000 voices speaking in unison, layered and discordant. He pushed himself up, his movements jerky, unnatural. "You just broke the cage." He stood, swaying, his feet planted in the slick slurry of the rooftop. He looked at his own hands, then up at the archangel's, and a slow, humorless smile spread across his lips, a smile that held none of the demon's malice, but all of its terrifying power. "The door isn't closed, Michael," Mike said, gesturing to the rent in the sky that was now pulsing with a faint, rhythmic heartbeat. "It's just missing its hinges." The rooftop grew deathly still, the rain seemingly suspended in the air around Mike, caught in the gravity of his new, fractured existence. The rent in the sky pulsed like a jagged weeping wound, leaking not brimstone, but a cold, colorless void. Michael raised his sword, his expression hardening. "You are an abomination of forces you cannot contain, Mike. You will draw the entire world into the abyss." Mike didn't look at the sword. He looked at the city below, a million tiny lights blinking in the dark, ignorant of the fact that their horizon was dissolving. I spent my life in a cage of guilt, waiting for someone to save me. Then I spent my eternity waiting to die. Do you know what happens when you stop waiting? He took a step toward the edge of the roof, his boots crushing the wet concrete. With every movement, the space around him buckled. You stop being a victim, Mike whispered. He raised both hands, and the gravity he commanded didn't just pull, it ripped. The rent in the sky widened, expanding with a sound like a planetary spine snapping. But instead of the abyss consuming the world, the energy began to flow out of it, a torrent of raw, unaligned creation that hit the city, the sky, and the three archangels with the force of a supernova. Gabriel screamed, his form dissolving into a prism of blinding, discordant light. Raphael fell to his knees, his healing radiance snuffed out as he was forcibly reverted to a state of primal energy. Even Michael, the sword of heaven, found his armor shattering, his celestial wings turning to ash as the fundamental laws of his being were rewritten by the absolute chaos radiating from the man. Mike didn't fight them. He simply ceased to be a target. He walked directly into the center of the singularity he had created. The war between the cages is over, Mike said, his voice echoing not in the air, but in the marrow of the archangel's bones. As he stepped into the void, the singularity collapsed. There was no explosion. There was no fire. There was only a sudden, jarring absence. The rain began to fall again, hitting the roof with normal, mundane thuds. The city lights flickered and returned to their steady, indifferent hum. The sky above the skyscraper was clear, the stars cold and uncaring. Michael stood alone on the roof, his armor gone, his sword shattered into dust at his feet. Gabriel and Raphael were nowhere to be found, their presence erased from the geometry of the world. Mike was gone too. There was no body, no trace of the demon, no sign of the priest. Only a small charred iron key lay in the middle of the wet concrete, its surface cold enough to frost the ground around it. Michael reached down, his hand trembling as he picked it up. He looked out over the city, a world that had been saved from the war it never knew was happening, by a man who had been destroyed by the weight of both sides. The archangel realized, with a crushing, absolute sorrow, that there was no one left to blame, and no one left to judge. The doors of heaven and hell were locked, and the key had been thrown into a void that no angel would ever be able to reach again. The war had ended, not with a victory, but with a silence that would last forever.